this is Celine from Blue Calla Patterns, and welcome to video 3 for the Stonecrop satchel. You may notice that in this video things are a little bit different than the first two. There's a few reasons for that without telling you a very long story. The first two videos were filmed back in February, just before COVID hit. And this was supposed to be a pattern for my spring retreat. Now, when COVID hit, I put everything on hold. So here I am restarting near the end of October and trying to complete the video series so I can finally release this pattern. So I'm in a different home now, and so the lighting and the sound and everything might be a little bit different. I had started filming this video back in February and I accidentally deleted it. So here I am restarting from the beginning. In this video, we're going to be assembling the front exterior of the bag, which is where you have the organizer pocket. Now, I'm not going to be doing the simple version with just a slip pocket with the flap closure. I'm going to focus primarily on doing the organizer pocket because it is a bit of a long sew and it's a bit more complicated than just doing a typical slip pocket with a flap closure. So what you're going to need to assemble in this video, and already I've noticed that I've forgotten my little dress zipper for the interior zipper pocket, but I'll get that later. The pieces that you're going to need for this video is the following: the card slot piece, and you should have your fusible woven interfacing fused to the wrong side, centered. So there's going to be a larger amount of space at the top and the bottom, and about 3/8 of an inch on either side. You're also going to need your remaining foam interfacing piece for the exterior. You're going to need the top, one of the top band exterior pieces. Your main pocket flap exterior pieces, you should have 2 of those. Your exterior bottom band piece, you should just have the 1 remaining. Your front side panel pieces, your exterior pieces, you should have 2 mirror image. Your organizer slip pocket piece with interfacing. Your organizer front panel exterior piece with interfacing. And with that, you should have also cut your Peltex piece. Your organizer back panel lining piece with interfacing. Your organizer zipper facing with interfacing. This is a lining piece. Your organizer zipper pocket lining pieces with interfacing on the wrong side. And your 2 6-inch zippers or 8 inches of zipper tape. And this has to be a number 5 or 4.5 zipper, which is 1 1/4 inch wide. So that's very important. You need to use this size zipper, otherwise your measurements will be off. So we're going to start by sewing the organizer slip pocket. You'll need 2 pieces. You'll need the organizer back panel lining fabric piece, so that's this piece here. And the organizer slip pocket piece should be a lining piece with interfacing on the wrong side. So what we're going to do first is fold this in half. Now you want the 9 1/8 of an inch length to be the bottom. And you're going to press it wrong sides together. Okay, and then, so this is the top folded edges, the top edge of my pocket, and then the raw edges is the sides and the bottom. I'm going to go over to my machine and I'm just going to top stitch along the top folded edge. Okay, so the top edge is top stitch. Now I'm going to take the organizer back panel piece and I'll place this on top. Make sure that these edges are aligned, and then you pin or clip it in place. And then go over to your machine and you just want to base the pocket piece to the organizer back panel piece along the sides and the bottom edges. So you're just doing a basting stitch with 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so this is basted on. Now we're going to fold this in half. And mark the bottom center and the top center of the pocket, and then we're going to sew from that bottom center mark to the top center mark. Make sure that you back stitch at the top to reinforce the opening of the pocket. Okay, so we now have 2 slip pockets. Now you're going to need your organizer zipper facing piece, and on the wrong side I've drawn a rectangle that is 6 inches wide by 3/8 of an inch high. And just make sure that it's centered. You should have 1 inch of space on either side of the rectangle box. So you want to make sure that it's centered. Then you're going to take your organizer back panel piece, the one where you've just sewn the slip pocket pieces, and you're going to place this so that they're right sides together. And you want to make sure that it's centered. And you can just use the top edge of the facing piece as a guide for placement. And then you want to pin that in place. And now we're going to sew the facing piece to the organizer back panel piece by sewing along the lines of the rectangle. And so you'll want to keep your needle in the down position so that you can rotate nicely at the corners and make nice sharp corners. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and sew this to the organizer back panel piece. Okay, so the facing piece is sewn, and now we're going to draw a line through the center, but don't draw it all the way to the ends. You can stop about 1/2 inch away from each end, and then draw 4 diagonal lines going from that center line to the corners. And then turn this around. Now I need to cut along those lines that I just drew. And it's better if you use a small pair of sharp scissors. You want some really sharp scissors. And when you're cutting the 4 diagonal lines, you want to try and get as close as you can to the corners without cutting any of the stitches. And for some reason, I always seem to forget to wear my glasses in this step, which is pretty important. So let's hope I'm not cutting any of my stitches here. Okay. Flip this around again. Now we're going to pull the facing piece in through the opening we just cut towards the wrong side. So, and then going very slowly, we're going to press the seam allowance here. And I find it helps if you dampen your fingers and sort of roll that seam between your fingers. And then press, and do it a little bit at a time. It sort of takes a little while, but I like the openings of my zipper pockets to look nice. Okay, and then flip it around and press again from the wrong side. Okay, so now this is ready. We're just going to set it aside for a minute. We're now going to sew the zipper pocket into our organizer piece. So you'll need both of your organizer zipper pocket lining pieces and your zipper. Now I did not have a 6-inch zipper, dress zipper, so I'm using a much longer zipper. It will still work. I'll just have to cut some of it away a little bit later. So what you'll want to do first is take one of the zippered pocket pieces and cut away 1 inch from the top edge. So you'll have one piece that is 1 inch shorter than the other. So you can throw that away. Now you're going to take that shorter piece and you're going to place your zipper on the right side. So line up the edges. So if your zipper is longer like mine, just line up the edge of the zipper tape with the edge of the zippered pocket, and you're placing both of them are right side facing up. I'm just going to pin this in place. And then I'm going to sew the zipper to the lining piece along this top edge with 1/4 inch seam allowance, and make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so the zipper is sewn here. We're just going to flip it like this, and you want to press the lining piece away from the zipper. And then we're going to take the second lining piece and place this on top. And then pin it in place, and you're going to do the same thing. You're just going to sew the zipper to the top edge of this second lining piece with 1/4 inch seam allowance, and make sure that you backstitch. Okay, so the second piece is sewn on. I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to press it away from the zipper. Okay, so now we're going to take the organizer back panel piece with the zipper pocket opening. Place it like this. Actually, first we're going to place the zipper pocket lining pieces. So you want the shorter piece here at the bottom, the one where we trimmed a bit. That one's going to be at the bottom. Okay, and you line up the edges of the zipper facing with the edges of the zipper pocket lining pieces, and you pin this in place. And then you're going to go over to your machine. You're going to sew the zipper in place through all the layers, all the way around the opening of the rectangle box with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I've sewn through all the layers to sew the zipper in place. Now flip this over. Here's where I'm going to trim this a little bit. Now you're going to bring this down so that the edges meet at the bottom here. And then press up. Okay, and now you're going to pin or clip this together. And we're going to sew along the sides and the bottom so that we close up our zippered pocket completely. Okay, so to do that, flip this over like this. Then you're going to go over to your machine, and you're going to flip the organizer back panel out of the way and start at the top. Not all the way at the top here, because we're going to trim away, but start where the zipper starts, and you want to sew as close as you can to that top stitching here. And you're going to backstitch and then sew all the way down. Sew across the bottom edge, and then flip it around, and then rotate and sew up along this side. Again, you're trying to sew as close as you can to this top stitching here around the zipper. and then back stitch again at the top of the zipper here. Okay, so I used some contrasting thread so that you can see my lines of stitching. And now we need to trim away. So I don't want the zipper facing piece to be caught in the seam allowance at the top. So I'm going to trim this away. Make sure you don't trim any of your back stitching stitches here. And then again, you're going to trim here along the sides. You can leave the bottom edge as it is. And along this side. Now, because we've trimmed some of the zipper, make sure that you seal those ends. You could either use fray check or you can melt it with a lighter. I usually melt with a lighter. And then this back panel piece is finished. Now we're going to do the front. We're going to sew up our card slots. We're now going to start working on our card slots. So obviously for this, you're going to need your card slot piece. Just one note before we start here. If you're using a directional print, you're going to want to pay attention to the note in the pattern. And when we're marking our card slot lines on the wrong side, the 3-inch portion that we are going to be marking is actually going to be the bottom of your card slot piece. So you'll want to make sure that the print goes in this direction. I purposely try to avoid this kind of situation, so I never use a directional print for my card slots, and it just makes it a lot simpler. But anyways, if you are using a directional print, make sure you pay attention to the note in the pattern about this. So now we're going to go to the wrong side of the card slot piece, and we're going to start marking our card slot lines. So the first line, you'll see in the diagram, all the measurements are listed, but our first line is going to be at 3 inches. And that's where one of these clear rulers comes in handy. I use this ruler so much. It was a great investment because it makes these sorts of things very, very easy. So the first block here is 3 inches, just like the diagram shows in the pattern. And again, that's the bottom piece of your card slots. So this is going to be at the very bottom. And so you want your print to go this direction if you're using a directional print. The second line is at 1 3/4. And then the next line is at 2.5 inches. Okay, and then you're going to see a repetition. So 1 3/4 inches, 2.5 inches, 1 3/4 inches, 2.5 inches, and then it ends with 1 3/4 inches. So I'm going to pause. I'll finish doing all my lines, and then I will show you what that looks like. Okay, so all of my lines are marked now. So you should have 3 inches, 1 3/4, 2.5, 1 3/4, 2.5, 1 3/4, 2.5, 1 3/4, and then a remaining piece. So now we're going to start pressing the card slots. We're going to start by, so I love this metal ruler for this part because it gets hot obviously when you press it, and so it sort of helps with pressing the card slots. So I put the edge of my ruler right at that line. So this is the 3-inch portion, and we're folding that so it's wrong sides together, and then we're pressing. So to make sure your card slots are nice, you'll always want to make sure that these edges here are perfectly aligned. So once I do just a basic crease, I just open it up, have a look, make some adjustments if I want, and then I press it again without the ruler. Okay, and there you go, I have my first crease. So now I'm going to flip this like this, and then I put my ruler at the next line. So I keep going, there it is. So I make sure that the edge of my ruler is right Now if you have a plastic ruler, please don't do this. You're going to have to do it a little bit differently. Okay, so now this is the 1 3/4 line, and this time I'm pressing the fabric right sides together. As you can see, it's right sides together. So I do a little crease, and then I take out my ruler, and then I press it again. And again, making sure that these edges here are lined up. Okay, now I'm going to, there's my next line. This is a 2.5 inch. And this time I'm pressing wrong sides together. So now we're going to be alternating. So at a 1 3/4 inch line, we're pressing right sides together. And when we're at a 2.5 inch line, we're pressing wrong sides together. So again, I'm just going to make sure that my crease is at the line. And I press again without the ruler. And then I'll just continue until it's finished. So I'll pause the video and I'll finish pressing all of my creases, and then I'll show you what the piece looks like. Okay, so all of the creases all the folds are pressed. And you should have, so this is your 3 inch portion, and then you're going to have 4 folded edges and then this remaining piece up here. So now what you're going to do is you're going to go over to your machine and you're going to top stitch each of the 4 folded edges with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from that top folded edge. Make sure that you're just stitching the individual folded edges, and you'll have to push the rest of the fabric out of the way. Okay, so the 4 edges have been top stitched. Now I'm going to pin all of these in place, and you want to make sure that there's an even distance between all of your card slots. And then all you're going to do is you're just going to use a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and you're just going to baste along this edge and this edge of your card slots. It's just to hold them in place so that they don't go out of alignment. Okay, so I'm going to finish pinning these, and then I'm going to go ahead and baste on both sides. Okay, so I've basted along the outer edges here. Now I need to make sure that the height of this piece is exactly 7 inches. So it should be 8 inches wide, because that's the width of the pieces that we cut, so 8 inches wide. But now we want the height to be 7 inches, and the height we want to measure from the bottom to the top. So if I line this up to the bottom here, 7 inches is right here. So I am going to trim this off. Make sure you don't make a mistake here, because refolding all these pieces somewhat painful. Now we're going to sew in the middle here to separate into 2 sets of card slots. And so because it is 8 inches wide, we know that if we measure 4 inches from either of the sides, then we're going to be sewing down the middle. So I am going to make a mark, very light mark. Just at the top of every card slot, and then at the top and the bottom. So I start sewing from the bottom edge, and when I get to the top folded edge of the card slots, I stop and I backstitch a couple of times, and then I keep going, and I just backstitch at the top folded edge of each card slot piece until I get all the way to the top. Then I should have 2 sets of card slots. Okay, so I now have 8 separate card slots. I'm going to set this aside for just a minute, And now I want you to take your 6-inch zippers, or if like me, you're using zipper tape, it'll be 8 inches of zipper. I'm guessing most of you will likely end up with zipper tape only because it's probably very difficult to find 6-inch handbag zippers. So you're going to, so if you have pre-made zippers, I just want to show you the diagram here and the pattern. So if you're using pre-made zippers, your zippers are going to look like this. And so what you're going to do is you're going to measure 6 inches from the metal stop at the closed end of your zipper, and you're going to make a mark on the zipper tape at the top and the bottom. And then you're going to baste your zipper. So if you're using 8 inches of zipper tape, you start from the very bottom edge of your zipper tape piece and you measure 6.5 inches and make a mark. So I'm using 8 inches of zipper tape. So my mark is going to be 6.5 inches up. So I'm just, because my numbers are here, I just make it easier here for my poor brain. And I'm making a mark along both sides at exactly 6.5 inches. And that's, you're measuring 6.5 inches from the bottom end of your zipper. Okay, so now make sure that your pull is behind those marks, and you want to open up the zipper, and then where you have a mark, you want to pinch the zipper at that mark, and then till it creates like a little pinch of fabric like this, and then you want to fold it and bring it up, and at the same time you're curving your zipper, that half of your zipper outwards. So it's a 90-degree angle, and my fold mark is right here, right at the coil. And then you go over to your machine and you base stitch this in place a couple of times. Do the same for the other side, and then for the 2 marks on your second zipper. Okay, so your zipper should look something like this now. Now before we continue, I really strongly advise that you go and sew across the bottom of your coil here, especially if you're using a nylon coil. If you're using a metal zipper, you probably don't want to sew across your teeth, so you might want to just hand baste a few stitches at the end, just so that you don't accidentally pull off your zipper pull when we continue the assembly. So I'm going to go ahead and do that myself right now before we continue. Okay, so now we're going to take the card slot piece and we're going to place a zipper right side facing up along the outer edges of our card slot piece. Now, if you're using zipper tape, you're using 8 inches of zipper tape like I am, you want to have the bottom edge of your zipper tape aligned with the bottom edge of your card slot piece. If you're using a pre-made zipper, it's different. You're going to want to have 1/2 inch of space between the bottom here of the card slot piece and your metal stop. Okay, so pinning one to one side and then the other to the other side. Okay. And then you're going to go over to your machine and you're going to baste these in place along the outer edges with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, so the zippers are basted in place. Now you want to take your organizer front panel piece and you're going to place it over top. And so they should be right sides together. And you can pin or clip that in place. And then you're going to sew along the sides and the top edge. You have to switch to your zipper foot. And use 1/4 inch seam allowance. So So you're sewing from the bottom edge here, 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitch. So all the way along the side till you get to the top corner, then stop, rotate. So across, again, you're maintaining your 1/4 inch seam allowance. Stop, rotate again, then 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way to the bottom here, and then back stitch again. Okay, so I've sewn all the way around, and then now I want to trim a little bit at the corners. So I'm going to trim the excess zipper, and then I'm going to, as usual, melt it with a zipper to seal the end. And where is my ruler? Okay, so I'll just show you, and then I'll turn it back and seal the zipper ends. I have lost my lighter. Okay, so then you're flipping so that it is right side facing out. And then you're going to press this flat, but don't top stitch the seam allowance yet. So I'm going to flip it back and I'm going to seal my zippers properly, and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, so I've turned the card slot piece right side facing out, and I've pressed my seam allowance all the way around. Now you're going to take the Peltex piece that you cut for the card slots, and you're going to insert it in between the layers, so in between the organizer front panel and the card slots, and you want to make sure that it goes all the way up to the top here, to this this top edge, and then use some clips to hold it in place. And then you're going to top stitch the seam allowance, but it's super important that along the zipper that you use a very small seam allowance when top stitching. 1/8 of an inch, or even smaller if you can. And then along the top edge, you want to use 1/4 inch seam allowance to make sure that you're sewing the Peltex piece into that top edge. Now the reason why you want to use a smaller seam allowance here is because you don't want to make the card slots too narrow and then your cards don't fit inside the card slots. Okay, so I'm going to go over and do that top stitching now. Okay, the top stitching is all done. If you want to make sure that your card slots fit, grab a card and test out each of your card slots just to make sure that they're not too small. Then you'll take your organizer back panel and place the piece that you just completed over top. So make sure that you're lining up the bottom edges, and clip the sides together, and then go over to your machine, and you just want to base the along the outer edges of the zippers with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So we're just basting along these sides for now. Okay, once these are basted onto the back panel, you're going to need your 2 front side panel pieces. Now don't forget that these are mirror image pieces, and you'll see there's a note on the pattern piece. This side attaches to the front pocket. So this one has a slight angle, this one is perfectly straight. So the side that is perfectly straight is the one that you want to attach to the sides here. And so we're just going to clip these into place. And when you're doing all this sewing, you're going to be pushing that zipper pull out of the way. So you'll have to pause and move it out of the way when you're sewing things. Okay, so I'm going to go over to the machine and I'm going to sew both of these in place, making sure that I backstitch at the top and the bottom. Okay, so these are sewn. Now I'm going to press them away from the zipper. And then you're going to top stitch that seam allowance with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now, if your zippers are really too long, trim them, and then again, make sure that you seal them either with heat or with freight check or something similar. Okay, so I'm going to do my usual, and I'm going to trim them, and then I'm just going to use a lighter and melt the edges. Okay, and then I'm going to go do my top stitching. The next thing we're going to do is assemble our main pocket flap. You'll need the pattern piece and both of your flap pieces. Now, I decided to use cork for both the exterior and the lining. This way I don't need to add any interfacing to the lining piece. It's already thick enough. If you're using fabric for your lining, you should also have a layer of fusible woven interfacing on the wrong side, as well as some fusible fleece. What you're going to start by doing is taking your pattern piece and marking the location for your turn lock, which I've already done. Then you place both pieces right sides together and clip or pin, depending on what you're using. And then you're going to go over to your machine and you're going to sew them together. Just start at one top corner, back stitch, and then sew all the way around. And when you get to the other top corner, back stitch again. Okay, once you have them sewn together, you're going to want to trim your seam allowance. And then you're going to flip the pieces so they are right side facing out. Now, if you're using fabric, you can press the seam allowance. I'm using cork, so what I do actually is I just sort of roll the seam allowance in between my fingers, and then I add a clip. And then you'll go over to the machine and you're going to top stitch the seam allowance. Okay, so now I'm going to go top stitch the seam allowance. We're now going to install the first part of our lock into our flap, and for this you should have several pieces to your lock. So you'll have the front plate, and then you'll have this part here. This is the part that actually turns, and then a back plate and some screws. So you'll want to use the back plate for the front part of your lock, and you want to place it over that mark that you made. You'll want it centered in the larger hole in the middle of the back plate. And then you will mark the outline of the holes. So the larger hole in the center, and then the two holes on either side where you're going to be installing screws. Okay, my pen is not working whatsoever. Let's try this again. There, now I have some marks. Okay. Okay, so this looks about right. And then I have a set of hole punches, and so I use this shape, for the center of the lock, and I have a hole punch, which I will have to find. I have a hole punch to do the holes for the screws on either side. All right, so I'm gonna pause and find the hole punch so I can show you punching out all the holes at once. Okay, so I found my hole punch. So what I'm going to start by doing is punching out this shape for the center of the lock. And I'm going to mute the sound. So this is noisy, but I'm going to mute the sound for this part. Okay, so I've punched out all the holes. So now I'm going to check it with the front part of my lock, just to make sure it all fits. Okay, that's pretty much right on. I got lucky. And then I placed the back plate and I screwed in. So usually you would put a drop of Loctite in the hole. I don't, of course I don't have it here because I didn't get it ready, but that I can add later on. Okay, one screw. And then the other screw. Okay, and now this is what the front of the flap looks like. It's a tiny bit crooked. Just adjust it. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to tidy up, move all this out of the way, and then I'll install the flap above my organizer pocket. Okay, so now you'll want to get your organizer pocket that we assembled previously, and you want to center the top edge of the flap just above your organizer pocket. And you just want to baste it in place along the top. So make sure that it's nicely centered over your pocket. Okay, now I'm going to go baste this in place with 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now we need to install the other part of our turn lock in the front pocket piece. So what you'll want to do is make a mark right in the center on your pocket piece. Then you will need this part of your lock as well as the washer. So just make sure that you double check which part of your washer, which slots in your washer that your prongs will go through. So it will go through the middle one. There is a center hole here. Center it over the mark that you just made. And then my pencil needs to be sharpened, of course. Here's my pen instead. And then mark the location where your prongs are going to go. And then you'll need a seam ripper, which of course I don't have handy. Okay, so then you're going to make a hole for the prongs, and you want that hole to go through, if you reach inside, you want the holes to go through the Peltex piece and the front fabric piece, but do not touch the card slot piece. You're also going to want to add some fray check to the holes before you install the second part of the lock. And you guessed it, I don't have the fray check ready beside me. Thought I had, I did not. All right, I'm gonna go get the fray check now. Okay, so I'm gonna put a bit of fray check along both of the holes. And then you're going to insert the prongs of your turn lock through those holes. And then you reach inside and you place the washer over the prongs. And then you fold the prongs over the washer. I'm never strong enough to do this part because those prongs are so strong. Okay, that hurt quite a lot. There you go, all done. Now you're going to want to cover those prongs to protect your card slot fabric. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a piece of tape and put that over the prongs. Okay, I don't think you can see, but I put a piece of clear tape over the prongs. Now I'm just checking. Okay, so the lock works nicely, everything fits nicely. So now we're going to attach the top band and the bottom band. So I will get those and we will attach them to the front. Okay, so I have the bottom band and the top band. Now I was not consistent with my seam allowance. So you can see here there's a little bit of extra fabric on either side. But if that happens, don't worry, we can just trim it. Once we're going to use the foam piece as our, basically as our guide for the shape. And then we'll be able to trim any excess fabric on the sides. So if you were like me and you were not consistent, don't worry about it. We can just easily fix that. Now I'm going to do it all at once. I'm going to also attach the top band to the top. And because there is a slight angle to the sides here, and I wanted to remind myself which side was the top edge. So this is the top edge. We want to be attaching the bottom edge to the top of the organizer pocket, and just make sure that you're centering it if you were off with your seam allowances like me. That way there, everything will remain centered when we trim. Okay, so I'm going to go sew this together and this together, and I'm going to make sure that I backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so the top and the bottom are attached, and now we need to top stitch. Now, because I'm using cork, I can't press. Otherwise, I would press this going upwards and this going downwards. Now, because I used cork and I can't press, I'm just going to go over to my machine and I sort of finger press as I top stitch the seam allowance here, and then along the bottom here. And then we're going to baste this to our foam. Okay, so everything is top stitched and I've placed it over my foam. I did have center marks here from when I traced out and cut out my foam pieces. So I want that to show on the wrong side, so I'm going to leave it on the wrong side here. It's going to come in handy when we're attaching to our gusset. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to clip this to the foam, runaway clip. And then I'm going to use the shape of the foam piece to trim the excess here along the sides. That way there I know that my front and the back of my bag is going to match perfectly. So I'm just going to turn this around. And do a little trimming. And then clip it. Now, I usually base this on with a zigzag stitch, and I don't have that machine here in the studio, so I'm going to go upstairs to the office and do that. Clip here. All right, so now I'm just going to go over to my other machine and base this on with a zigzag stitch all the way around. And then we will be ready for the next video where we start attaching the gusset to the front and the back exterior panels. And we're also going to sew up the connectors and the handles.